Why is there so much violence in the Old Testament? This is a tough question. I think of something a scholar once said. He said, in the Bible, there are stories that are quick turn the page moments. Meaning, there are stories, particularly in the Old Testament, that cause us to just say, boy, I don't really understand this. I've got to quickly turn the page just to move on to the next story. What do we do with this challenge of violence in the Old Testament? I want to make a few points here. The first pertain to how we should interpret the scriptures. When we interpret the scriptures, I want to give you two words to remember. The first is prescriptive, and the second is descriptive. Prescriptive, as an interpretation tool, has with it the idea of God instructing people as to how to live, prescribing things. Descriptive has with it the idea of just simply God, through the authors of Scripture, describing the way things are, describing stories. Now, prescriptive and descriptive are very important to understand and not to confuse the two. An objection that is often raised is more than that, actually. It's simply saying, look, yeah, but what about specific cases? In the case of Joshua, the book of Joshua, what about the conquest? Is that not ethnic cleansing? This is something, if you're familiar at all with the writings of Richard Dawkins, one of the new atheists, you will be familiar with this. He says, look, the book of Joshua is full of just ethnic cleansing. I would say here again, we've got to actually look at the text carefully. We've got to use these interpretative tools well. What do I mean? Well, when we actually read the story of Joshua, yes, I mean, there is concern. God does bring judgment. But the judgment is not upon ethnicity. No, ethnicity is sacred. The problem is sin. The problem is sin. Now, of course, I realize that might not actually bring comfort to us, but that's when we actually need to go back to the definition of sin. What is sin? Well, sin is violating that which is right. And even more specifically in this case, sin is violating that which is sacred. What does that tell us? Well, when we look to the book of Joshua, it tells us that God is not judging a person or a group of people because of their ethnicity. No, far from it. The problem is sin. That means that whether you are in the camp of Israel, in the case of Joshua, or outside the camp, sin is the problem, and God deals with it. And in a sense, this should actually bring us some resolve. So remember these three things: descriptive, prescriptive, and the problem of sin. The problem of sin in this case of Joshua and what God does with it should actually bring us some resolve again to see that God judges that which is wrong.